Kathryn. On behalf of the organizing committee, we heartily welcome you to the lecture series on what we call the Contemporary Development Debates, which was inaugurated by our director on the eve of Mahatma Gandhi Jayanti earlier this month. This lecture is going to be the fourth in the series. We are honored to have you, Professor Kathryn, from DePaul University, Chicago. Professor Arun Kumar Sharma is from IIT Kanpur, and he'll be giving the inaugural note. And then we have Professor Arima Mishra, presently at Ajim Premji University, and Professor Chinmay from IIM Ahmedabad as two discussions. Today's lecture series, the topic of the lecture today is Innovating the Global Innovation System after COVID-19. As you know, the topic at hand is very pertinent. Everyone on the planet is affected by COVID-19 pandemic, which has become a epidemic, which has become a pandemic. More so because of the innovation crisis that Kathryn will be highlighting, and the system where patient health is subjugated to the drive for profit. Now let us get started. I'll briefly, in 2 minutes, introduce Professor A.K. Sharma, who is the most loved and cherished person and scholar that we have known. Professor Sharma has served the Department of Humanities and Social Science at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, for a very long time. His areas of expertise include social demography, and social statistics, new social movements, social development, social aspect of science, technology, and society, Gandhian theory, and sociology of health and illness. He completed his PhD in sociology from IIT Mumbai. Before that, he was at the Indian Institute of Population Studies and University of Meerut and University of Agra. He has published many books and research articles on population, society, Gandhian philosophy. His recent book includes Urbanization in India, Issues and Challenges, Psychosocial Aspects of Health and Illness. He is life member of several societies and have been distinguished teacher at IIT Kanpur in 2014 and many other times. He's visited IIT Patna for the PhD defense of one of our students. We are so happy to have him here. Professor Sharma, it is over to you for your inaugural note. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aditya Raj, Professor Kathryn, Professor Arima Mishra, Professor Chinmay and other friends. I'm very happy to be present on this occasion when Professor Kathryn is going to talk about a very important issue of how to deal with global pandemic. I know that Professor Raj has developed this series of lectures on development. So far, development has taken two different roads. One, say, sociology of development, another is development action. In sociology of development, again, there have been lots of paradigm changes. In 1930s, 40s, in Asian countries and other African, Latin American countries, there was a feeling that development means transformation of society or changes in the means of production along collectivistic lines as adopted in socialist countries. Then American sociologists and some others gave a new turn, and per capita income suddenly became the index of development. And then inequality, then United Nations Human Development Index, and then there was a feeling that this Human Development Index has to be more sensitive to gender inequalities and so on. So this, and finally the sustainable development. Now another line of inquiry in sociology of development is to deal with development action on the part of the state, private sector and the so-called third sector of community organizations or voluntary organizations, NGOs, civil society organizations. Now, why I'm mentioning this, that in both sociology of development approach and development action approach, health has been a very important issue. Actually, even in the original conception of Human Development Index, uh, life expectancy was one of the important factors, and in fact, infant mortality rate was also a factor. Life expectancy indicated overall health, and infant mortality, the environmental situation, availability of drinking water, and related issues. And in development action, we find that for decades, our civil society organizations, state, and private organizations are working a lot in the field of health. Everybody is working in the field of health. Now, a turn came in 2019. Before this, we started thinking that the global pandemic is over, and the pandemic or uh, epidemic of the kind of uh, Spanish flu, which happened in 1918, would not occur again. But then soon we find that there was SARS, there was H1N1, uh, swine flu, and then the coronavirus. In 2019, we have coronavirus, which is a serious developmental issue, not only because state, private sector, and civil society activists were working in the field of health, but because this coronavirus not only killed millions of people and affected millions of others who have survived, but still they are facing uh, the post-COVID complications. But also because this type of, or is, this scale of global pandemic had not occurred before, and this also shows, according to Professor Kathryn, this shows the failure of institutional mechanisms of all types. It shows the failure of state, it shows the failure of private sector, pharma companies, drug manufacturing, innovations, entrepreneurship, failure at all the levels. And I do not want to take much time because we all are eager to hear Professor Kathryn. Professor, Professor Kathryn has worked in China, in India, in Japan, and in Singapore. And in one of her latest books, based on a long field work, she is talking about what are the causes of this failure of institutions. She works on institutions. In earlier works, she worked on entrepreneurship, and she suggests that one of the main things that should happen, that health and research should become part of commons. So far, she uses the metaphors of cages and silos to show what kind of research innovations are taking place, and how private sector is benefiting from the rent from state, and they are all encashing on uh, medicines and researches which are already patented, and no new discoveries are. One very important point which I find in Professor Kathryn's work is that while earlier, till the time of discovery of penicillin, all the knowledge and all the drugs, all the medical products, all therapies belong to common. They were transparent and they were available for use to the entire world. But now this is no more the case. And she will be talking about how pharma companies, how drug industry, how research organizations have built their own islands, and they are all trying to benefit from the COVID-19 situation. And what is the remedy? The remedy, what I understood from a casual reading of her book, the remedy lies that everything, research, our knowledge, must belong to the common pool. Our entrepreneurship, our private sector, state, and we have to go beyond national boundaries. So when I say common pool, Professor Kathryn wants to say that the knowledge, research, innovation, production, must belong to a global pool. And this is all I just want. I can say in introduction to Professor Kathryn. We are all very eager to hear Professor Kathryn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Without any delay, let me go to introducing the key speaker in about a minute or so. Professor Kathryn is Vincent DePaul Professor of Political Economy at DePaul University, Chicago. She's an established scholar of innovation and entrepreneurship, science and technology policy, and economic development. Her most recent book, published in 2019 by Stanford University Press, is called Trans, Beyond Techno Nationalism, Biomedical Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Asia. Using the lens of venture startup firms in China, India, Japan, and Singapore, Beyond Techno Nationalism finds a new networked techno nationalism guided national policy and firm level strategies supporting competitive growth in frontier technologies. Her 2001 book, Pandemic Medicine: Why the Global Innovation System is Broken and How We Can Fix It, from where I think she's going to talk a fair bit, analyzes international competition in new drug discovery and access to essential medicines. Professor Kathryn is also researching emergent organizations and supporting sustainability of natural medicine and the plant biodiversity upon which it depends. She served on the METI, State Department, Japan, US Innovation and Entrepreneurship Council, and serves currently on the board of directors of the Japan America Society of Chicago, on US Japan bilateral advisory boards for the American Council on Education and the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology Graduate University Foundation, and is a member of the US Japan Council. In her journals, blogs, policy briefing, podcasts, and books, she employs such methods as historical, institutional, policy, and social network analysis, and original fieldwork based case studies contextualized within global politics and markets. She earned her doctorate in political economy from Northwestern University, while a Fulbright doctoral fellow at the Researcher Center for Advanced Science and Technology at Tokyo University. I was also trying to read her introductory chapter yesterday, and many a times I was compelled to think about Mahatma Gandhi's work, Hind Swaraj. I won't go there, and we are all looking forward to hearing from Professor Kathryn. Professor Kathryn, it is to you. You can share your slide and get started. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Let me get ready. This is the first time I'm doing this on Google, as I said before. Can everyone see that? Can everybody see that? Because I can't see you anymore.
Yes.
So is it okay? Because I can't see you at all. But everybody's good?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening. I would like to thank Professors Aditya Raj and Papi Raj for the kind invitation to speak with you today. I was going to try to do this lecture without my old lady glasses because you said it was being streamed on YouTube, but unfortunately I can't read my notes if I take them off, so I'm going to be leaving them on. I would also like to thank our keynote inaugural introducer, Professor A.K. Sharma, for the very thorough overview of what I'm going to say. And in fact, he said it quite eloquently and probably better than I'm going to, but I appreciate you taking the time to have a look at the materials that I sent over. I would also like to thank all of the participants today who are taking time out of a very late night evening in India Standard Time. Of course, our audience, our moderator, our discussants for joining despite this late time. Today, as our hosts had mentioned, I'm presenting the introduction chapter from my book that was just published last month. It's called Pandemic Medicine: Why the Global Innovation System is Broken and How We Can Fix It. This chapter presents the book's central questions and offers a conceptual framework. This book, Pandemic Medicine, follows from my 2019 Stanford University Press book that Dr. Raj mentioned before. It's called Beyond Techno-Nationalism, Biomedical Innovation, Entrepreneurship in Asia. In that book, I analyzed national government policy and entrepreneurial firm-level strategy in stimulating innovation and entrepreneurship in products for human health. So the focus in that book was on entrepreneurial case studies and how they navigated state policies in order to be innovative in the service of human health. Pandemic Medicine, on the other hand, my most recent book, as I said, published last month, analyzes the possibilities for an open innovation system at a global level, our global innovation system for all people. In 2016, I was there in India, in Delhi, Mumbai, and Pune, interviewing biopharmaceutical scientists and entrepreneurs for my 2019 book, Beyond Techno-Nationalism. As an aside, that includes Ms. Mazumdar Shah of your company, Biocon, who's a fascinating entrepreneurial story, and that's in the other book, actually. So you might know this history, but I was quite shocked in 2016, this is very recent for me, 2016, to learn for the first time that the pharmaceutical company Pfizer had essentially created the World Trade Organization Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. This is called the WTO TRIPS. And it was a way specifically, again, surprise to me, and I've been a political economist my entire adult life, that it was created specifically to exclude Cipla and other Indian biopharmaceutical companies from WTO markets as a stick, in other words, if they continued to make generic antibiotics for the developing world. Children in Southern Africa in particular were dying. Why would Pfizer do this?
Professor Kathryn, if I may intervene, are you changing your slides?
Yes.
Okay, because I think we can't see your next slides onwards. We are still on the first slide.
Oh, okay.
Are you using a Mac?
I am.
Okay, you just go to the slideshow and just play slideshows as you will do normally to change your slides, and it will change.
What do you mean as I do normally?
Like you just present your screen and go to the slide show and you just do play slides, and then you just keep on pressing enter, return.
That's what I did.
I'm sorry to interject, ma'am, but I think she might be presenting a window of her tab. That might be the reason, because when you present a tab, a particular tab, then the photo of that tab is visible to us. No changes are visible to us. You might have to present the whole window, ma'am.
Okay, so now I'm presenting my screen. Now I'm presenting my whole screen.
Yes, we can see it. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so
yes.
just
you're good.
Okay, so first book, 2019.
Yep.
Well, actually, this is my third book, 2021, published last month. Quickly. New Yorker cartoon. Enjoy that for a moment. This is going to be great on the outtakes on YouTube. And then this is where I was. All right, thank you for bearing with me in my unfamiliarity with this presentation format. We've been completely addicted to Zoom here in the United States at most universities, so nobody's using Google, unfortunately. A lot of business people use Google, but at the universities, we're all on Zoom for the security purposes. So why did Pfizer essentially create the WTO TRIPS agreement? They did it because there was money to be made on their monopoly patents for these sorts of drugs. The pharmaceutical lobby tells us that without patents, there would be no new innovative medicines. Not true. Industry data shows that more than 75%, in fact, of research and development spending goes into what is called evergreening patents. That is, patents on minuscule molecular level tweaks to existing drugs. How does this not very innovative innovation system continue to survive? By 2020 alone, the drug lobby had spent a record $309 million, that's in just 1 year, to cement the status quo of a patent-centric global IPR system. Its latest target in 2020, not surprisingly, preventing the COVID-19 vaccine know-how from being shared with the neediest countries around the world. Meanwhile, Pfizer, one of the 3 major COVID-19 vaccine makers, reported more than $11 billion, that's B, billion dollars in COVID-19 vaccine revenue in just the first 6 months of 2021. This is historical revenue, so it includes 2020, but only the first half a year before the 3rd booster has been approved in the United States. They've already made 11 billion. Many medical discoveries in the 20th century, as Professor Sharma introduced previously, as discussed in this first chapter, had been shared in the public commons, ensuring a fair and equitable access to essential medicines. Discoveries had been shared in the public commons, meaning their inventors never sought to patent them. These have included the first antibiotic, penicillin, among many, many others. Using the example of insulin, a natural biologic discovered in 1921, the doctors and scientists who were Canadian, seeking to save the lives of patients suffering from diabetes, obtained a patent on this discovery of insulin, but immediately sold it for a mere $1 to the University of Toronto, saying at the time, quote, "Insulin belongs to the world." These doctors were hoping that this move would ensure that this life-saving discovery would be held in the public commons. Sadly, pharmaceutical companies including Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi have obtained incremental process patents on it and together command 90% of the global market for insulin. These pharmaceutical firms have, since insulin's discovery nearly 100 years ago, been able to capture these evergreening patents. These are also called pejoratively Me Too drugs, meaning they've been incremental modifications of the original insulin that had been shared as a public good in the global innovation commons. Monopoly profits for these companies in the hundreds of billions of dollars have followed. Even today, nearly a century after the initial innovation, patented insulin is a major source of revenue for big global pharma. Again, there was money to be made, monopoly patent profits to be gained. Meanwhile, potentially life-saving natural medicines are disappearing due to biodiversity loss and biopiracy, just as we are entering an age of pandemics. Why is it fair to say that we are in an age of pandemics? Because the frequency and severity of viral disease spreading across borders is on the rise. Scientists anticipate that these outbreaks will continue to worsen due to loss of biodiversity that is bringing human populations in close proximity to the wild animals and dangerous microbes that harbor these kinds of disease. Since 2012 alone, at least 5 viral diseases have reached epidemic proportions. The current novel coronavirus is just the latest mutation. The Inclusive Innovation Commons framework of this book is inspired by the contributions of Elinor Ostrom to our understanding about governance of the commons, but I'm fascinated to hear Professor Raj's comment about Gandhian theory and his activism, so I will very much look forward to talking about that in the Q&A. Also, Joseph Stiglitz argues that the patent-centric global IPR system has led to a new enclosure movement, fencing off the innovation commons. Further, Stiglitz has noted that most supposed R&D investment by pharma is actually on marketing campaigns, as I mentioned earlier. In sum, a lot of money is going into not very much real innovation into new drug discovery. Rather than have an open innovation commons inclusive of, for example, stakeholders with a sense of noblesse oblige, we have a system that has proven itself woefully unprepared in the current pandemic, fragmented and siloed. Instead of coordinate efforts under an inclusive architecture of open innovation, we instead have what I call crisis innovation, trying to bring diagnostics and treatments to patients. National attempts have been hampered by conflicting national and state policies and varying levels of competency in national leadership. We know a lot about that here in the United States before the recent election, as well as failures in international cooperation. In pandemic medicine, I find that emergent organizations in China, India, and Japan, including certain public-private partnerships, PPPs, are doing their part to foster innovation that is open and inclusive, while encouraging sharing in a meso-level commons. COVID-19 is the second SARS virus. The first hit China in 2002. At the time, the spread was checked because scientists were able to map the genomic structure of that virus quickly, having already been collaborating on the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project brought together researchers from all over the world, transcending national and institutional boundaries within a common goal of mapping the entire human genome. The innovation architecture of the HDP can be described as an open innovation commons. A commons is a space where a public good can be accessed by all. An innovation commons is a space where new ideas, novel discoveries are shared as a public good. New drug discovery for essential medicines is an issue area that illuminates the normative significance and moral economy of the commons. Data indicates that natural medicines and the knowledge about them held in the innovation commons have contributed to more than half of the patented drugs currently on the market. Others estimate this closer to 70% of all patented drugs. The precursor epidemic of SARS in 2002 was contained. Hospitals in mainland China, Guangzhou and Guangdong province in particular, included natural, non-synthetic, plant-based medicines in the treatment course. As a consequence, the mortality and morbidity rate in areas treating patients with natural, sometimes called traditional medicine, was significantly better than in regions that did not. Natural medicines are not patented. It used to be that you could not patent nature. Patents were never granted on living things. Jonas Salk, the inventor of the polio vaccine, when asked in 1954 why he did not seek a patent for his invention, responded, "Can you patent the sun?" Flash forward to SARS-2 or COVID-19, and we have a global innovation system that is fragmented by a patent-centric intellectual property rights regime that discourages sharing. In fact, it punishes sharing. Meanwhile, the majority of the world's population, 85% according to the World Health Organization, depends on natural medicines for their basic healthcare needs. These issue areas are complex and interconnected, as this Venn diagram shows. Natural medicines, the foundation for all medicines, depend on plant genetic biodiversity. If most of humanity depends on them for basic healthcare, then it makes sense that innovations for new drugs should be inclusive of the ways in which natural medicine has been shared in the innovation commons, what I call an open innovation sandbox. What we have now, unfortunately, is a system of silos, enclosing the innovation commons for medicine discovery. Patenting the natural biologic world enriches pharmaceutical companies while overall human health suffers. I know that I just spent most of my time framing the issues. Let me turn now to potential solutions based on original fieldwork in Asia from 2016 to 2020. How can we unpack these complex issues in seeking policy solutions that work for national governments, as well as articulate up to multilateral organizations and other transnational networks? One way is through analyzing emergent organizations. These innovative organizations are the subject of chapters in the book about policy experiments underway by national governments in China, India, and Japan, in partnership, but sometimes at odds with certain private sector and transnational actors. Each of these case studies has had the goal of serving human health by developing novel medicines and/or protecting and conserving natural medicine knowledge and plant genomic materials for medicine. A pattern emerges in the way these organizations structure their innovation activities. As I mentioned earlier, I call them innovation sandboxes and also pools. As this stylistic matrix shows, sandboxes provide a structure or structured play to coax participants, be they national firms, foundations, or NGOs, to collaborate in an approximation of an open innovation commons in the aim of novel medicine discoveries. Intellectual property pools, typically pools of patents or other compound libraries, are also a meso step or approach towards greater sharing across institutional boundaries. Framing the analysis of emergent organizations in a typology matrix helps to situate these cases along a continuum of high to low novelty and high to low openness or inclusivity, as we see in the public commons. In sum, it is not only about removing the fences around the sandbox of innovative activity, but also inviting a greater breadth of stakeholders to play in it. That is, the global IPR regime remains firmly in the grip of the WTO TRIPS. In turn, behind TRIPS are pharmaceutical and other corporations with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. The absolute last thing they want is transformational and inclusive change. Nor do they want to see any push for a sui generis intellectual property rights regime, as China has indicated it might seek through its proactive protection of its vast natural medicine corpus. India might do the same. If we look at the levels of innovation systems, we can see various kinds of cases to study in order to understand the modern enclosure effect of the patent-centric global IPR system in terms of its current exclusivity, but also the potential for inclusivity. I'd just like to say that I'm almost through with my talk because I want to make sure that we have ample time for the discussants, for our moderator, and also to talk about some of these cases in greater detail. So I'm just showing this slide as an example of some of the levels of analysis that we could talk about in the Q&A, but also are present in the book itself. The case studies of this research are at the national and local level while referencing the global innovation system context. Cases include the Global Health Innovative Technology Fund, GHIT, a partnership in Japan, the National Traditional Medicine Knowledge Registry in China, and the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library in India. These represent a few of the 13 cases I analyzed across China, India, and Japan, and here they are plotted in the typology matrix in terms of their structure of innovation. Meanwhile, national governments, the United States in particular, have defected from sharing scientific discoveries in the commons. This is, of course, until this most recent administration, monopolizing profits from scientific discovery inside cages and silos. As a result, in this global pandemic, we have an every man for himself scenario where patients are dying while governments bicker over the cost of supplies, even going so far as to be bidding against each other. The result has been twofold: higher prices and low overall access to essential medicines. Rather than dwell any further on what is wrong with our global innovation system and the misbehaving players within it, let me turn now to some optimism for our future in emergent organizations operating in open innovative spaces of sandboxes and pools. The Global Health Innovative Technology Fund, GHIT, a partnership in Japan between the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, Takeda Pharmaceutical and other pharmaceutical companies, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Wellcome Trust, and United Nations Development Program to discover new essential medicines for neglected tropical diseases called NTDs. As of 2021, several promising diagnostics and therapies are in the pipeline of GHIT for malaria, tuberculosis, and dengue fever, among several others. Another initiative in Japan sponsored by, again, Takeda Pharmaceutical is the Takeda Garden for Medicinal Plant Conservation, nestled in the northern mountains of Kyoto. While the Takeda Kyoto Garden functions primarily as a demonstration garden for local schools and universities, including pharmacists in training, it also conserves medicinal plant biodiversity through a seed and rhizome bank. This effort by Takeda is noteworthy because it is decoupled from the profit of the company. The percentage of the revenue coming from natural medicines is minuscule, less than 1%. Rather, it serves the Japanese notion of nen no tame. Nen no tame is a concept, just in case, and in this example, conservation for its own sake, just in case, of a presently unknown need for it in the future. Japan's approaches to our global innovation commons are pragmatic. As such, Japan remains mostly in the quadrant of pools of the TISA through the lower right quadrant, through its quasi-open sharing of existing discoveries and making incremental innovations to current technologies. Initiatives in India have been truer to the ideal of an innovation commons sandbox and offer inspirations in revitalizing our global innovation commons for essential medicines. So I could have talked to you today about China, but China has much more of a techno-nationalist approach, and I just was so impressed by so many of the initiatives that I discovered in India. So I thought it would be more interesting for us because you all know more about it than I do. I'm just a visiting researcher to talk about some of the cases that I encountered in India. So one example is the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library, or TKDL, which was established as India's response to American and European attempts in the 1990s to patent natural medicine knowledge about turmeric and neem. In other words, those American researchers, two of them were non-resident Indians, were trying to extract ancient traditional medicines and the knowledge about them from the open commons and silo them from access by the people. On the other hand, TKDL, through coding millions of records, and this is where India really shines in terms of the application of information technology, expertise, and deep knowledge about programming to trying to protect and conserve plant diversity for medicines that will hopefully save humanity from itself. So through these millions of records about traditional Indian medicine, and that includes all of the panoply of different Indian medicines, not just Ayurveda, but all of the others, including Unani, etc. Make sure that this TKDL makes sure that this medicinal knowledge remains in the public commons and protected from monopoly exploitation, although it has not been without some difficulty because of the expense in trying to fight when somebody in a European or in the United States, a European country or the United States tries to patent a traditional knowledge-based drug. The cost of the legal battle is quite high. So TKDL has served some purposes, but it has not solved the overall problem of these global pharmaceutical companies having millions of dollars to spend on in-house legal teams where target countries that have their knowledge being exploited really are at a structural disadvantage in terms of the access to global corporate attorneys. Another initiative in India is the open source drug discovery program, predicated on the idea that participation grants the right to distribute healing discoveries. So if you participate in OSDD, you have the right to share that knowledge. And this is in 180-degree contrast to patents, which grant the right to exclude others from accessing medicine discovery. Consequently, OSDD offers a cure to the malady of the anti-commons through incentivizing the open sharing of scientific discoveries in its innovation sandbox. Many of you are already familiar with this history in India, and I'd love to talk about it in the Q&A, so I won't go on any further. And I would be happy to discuss other cases in China, India, and Japan during the question time. Of course, the greatest detail about these emergent organizations supporting open innovation is found in the book Pandemic Medicine. Thank you. With this, I will close and thank you for your feedback and hopefully figure out how to stop sharing here. Okay.
Wasn't it nice? It was amazing, Kathryn. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to the two discussants. They are Professor Arima Mishra and Professor Chinmay. Professor Arima Mishra is a faculty with the School of Development at Ajim Premji University. Her area of expertise includes medical anthropology, health system policies and practices, qualitative research methods. She has been working on a wide range of issues like social construction of chronic illness, immunization, and mother-child health, health system governance, and methodological interface between social science and public health. She has taught at the University of Delhi and Institute of Public Health, Bangalore. She has done research for more than 2 decades now. She has been academic visitor at several universities like University of Minnesota, at Glasgow, Edinburgh. She was a recipient of M.N. Srinivas Memorial Prize, which I also got in 2013 by the Indian Sociological Society, and she has published in several venues, academic venues, including EPW, and she has got the Charles Wallish Fellowship as well. And the other discussant is Chinmay Tumbe. Allow me to introduce both of them, and then they can both come in one by one. Professor Arima Mishra first, and then my friend Chinmay. Chinmay is a faculty at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. His area of research includes urban labor economics, business and economic history, migration studies. He completed his PhD from IIM Bangalore. He was Alfred Chandler International Visiting Scholar in business history at Harvard Business School 2018. He was a Jean Monnet Fellow at European University Institute Florence in 2012-13. He is a member working group on migration, Ministry of Urban Housing and Urban Poverty Elevation. He is also member of editorial board of Migration and Development. He has published many significant books. One of the way I came to know him was through his book called India Moving, A History of Migration, published by Penguin. I think it's an amazing book. I wrote to him thereafter. Another significant book which compelled us to reach out to him is the book The Age of Pandemic, 1817, 1920, How They Saved India and the World, published by HarperCollins. This book documents the scale of devastation, the likely causes and consequences, and the resilience with which people faced those pandemics. So we'll hear both the discussions and then we will take questions. Dr. Papia also has a few things to say. First, we'll go to Professor Arima Mishra. Ma'am, over to you.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
So can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Aditya and Papia, for inviting me to this. And Professor Kathryn, it's wonderful to kind of listen to this. I've gone through your introductory chapter. I don't work on innovations, but the politics of that sounds quite familiar otherwise in the field of health. I listened to your talk with mixed feelings, in the sense that, mixed emotions. One, the sense when you're talking about pandemic medicine and this whole politics of innovations and the big capture, the capture by big pharma is really troubling, because that's something that which we not only are witnessed, during COVID-19, but also in the past. It's almost like history has repeated itself. Everybody has seen it, what happened during the, access to ART treatment during HIV/AIDS, because of all this. So that's always kind of troubling when we're talking about, healthcare. But I was also kind of, it also gave us a sense of optimism. When you actually, your second part of the title is that how to fix it. So, on the one, it looks like, wow, these are kind of, almost like solid power structures deciding a lot of these kinds of things. But, it looks like, there is a way out. So that gives us, a lot of hope. As I said, that this is very timely, not only because of COVID-19, because as I said, that we have also kind of, seen particularly the politics of innovations and the way that the pharmaceutical industry and its lobbying and networking with others actually have worked. And the kind of the cost to human lives, has been, history has witnessed all this. But I think that because of the scale and intensity of the pandemic, it's not about Africa, it's not about India, it's not about Asia, it's actually entire globe. So the visibility became much more in terms of the kinds of, suffering that all of us we witnessed too. And hence it perhaps, adds a little bit of a much more significance to perhaps reinvigorate the discussion on, innovations and, and the role of pharmaceutical industry, national governments and international organizations. But I feel that this whole question of, innovations and what it does and what it does not do, I feel that it does raise foundational questions about the field of health, right? And those foundational questions that we are talking about, whether it's about the kind of, commons that you are imagining, or, and the kind of things that we are otherwise witnessing, this whole question then closes. The foundational questions is that, sometimes you wonder whether this whole question of health and healthcare being a global public good, is that really a settled debate? Because a lot of it is justified, because, not the, knowledge transfer cannot happen. Some people cannot have access to, quality vaccines or even just the vaccine or even essential medicines. It also, we are still, in between this whole question of whether health and healthcare is driven by profit logic or is social logic, which is what has actually characterized this whole field of health. We do call it, we say that we would like to believe it to be a public good, but in a lot of how things have evolved that one does wonder, and why really the capture in terms of what the private sector actually does and get away with it is something that I think which is very, very important when you're looking at access and issues of equity, particularly when we're talking about access to essential medicine. So I really feel that that's at the heart of it, because this whole imagination institution, in terms of an institutional network that we're talking about, whether everybody should have access to this kind of knowledge and research and development for, because the questions there is that innovations for what and innovations for whom? And that is decided by these, fundamental questions that I really think it's important. And this whole question which really fascinates me is that the whole question of inclusive and the open that you're talking about. Though I have not, as I said, have worked on innovations, but I have worked on traditional medicine, and we looked at particularly in terms of revitalization of traditional medicine, right? And we looked at 3 states in South India, and Kerala obviously was one of them. And it's interesting, in resonating with some of the things that you have spoken about, even if it's not at a grand level, but at a localized level, this whole questions of how knowledge can be, this whole question of inclusivity, right, in terms of stakeholders, and also inclusivity in terms of the objectives of it, right? So it is about protection, of knowledge of the communities that it belongs to, and because we were also looking at not just the codified knowledge, but also the so-called non-codified knowledge. We were looking at both. Kerala has a very interesting, rich history of that non-codified knowledge as well, and so the protection of knowledge, the conservation, of that we're talking about in terms of, the biodiversity, etc., and also product innovations, right? So combining all these objectives in that sense, and benefit sharing, etc., kind of a thing. We did witness very interesting kind of models where, and that also relates to a question that, are we in a situation where we should be talking about this versus that, right? Government versus private, that versus this, or perhaps reimagine in terms of how we look at these different stakeholders in that sense. So here's, for example, one of the ways that, one of the, experiments in Kerala was about, it looked at the community, academia, and market linkages, right? So it's about all this. If it's about protection, it's about product innovation, as well as it's about that, right? So all those, experiments do share that kind of a hope that we perhaps need not only look at this whole question of, government versus somebody else, but, if we are saying that, these innovations have a larger cause in that sense for people to have, access to, in that sense, of essential medicines, and we do see traditional medicine to be playing an important role, is perhaps, these are some of the ways that one can think about. But I must also say, from our, the more that we try to kind of understand these models as well, they're also caught up in a question of politics of knowledge, that was quite in that sense of, who is included as a stakeholder when we're talking about, next level of knowledge has to be validated, innovations, etc. Politics of knowledge, but also politics of, one is this whole question of conservation, protection, and use of for human health, but also this whole question of exploitation for commercial purposes, which take a product beyond the people who otherwise should be accessing it, looms large in many of these experiments as well. So that's something that people who are involved in it are continuously struggling with it and trying to find way out of it. But definitely some of these, even if at a local level, they do offer some kind of a hope to figure out how should we look at it in terms of this innovation networks. If we really think that innovations are meant for alleviating human suffering due to whether COVID-19 or chronic diseases or dengue or malaria in that sense. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Arima. Professor Chinmay, do you want to comment? Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for this invitation. Very interesting talk. Just very brief comments. I'll start with just providing some context in terms of economic history, which is a field which I engage a lot with. a lot of models of global innovation. If you look at the industrial revolution of the 18th century, early 19th century, a lot of the new research now suggests that a lot of it actually happened without patenting at all. So the most significant event of the last 2000 years in science and technology took place through prizes, took place through fellowships, through a very interesting pattern of science and technology development without actually fully enforceable patenting regime. There's new work by Zorina Khan, called Patents and Prizes and so on, which also looks at the 19th and 20th century context and really how important intellectual property rights are for any science and technology. Now, given that broad idea, this is a very interesting talk and book in the sense that it is going to reframe a very burning global question right now. Is, for example, when you think of vaccination, think of vaccine equity, which is a huge issue right now. What is the best way to do that? How important are big pharma, to this entire project? Now, some broad thoughts which I had. One was on demography. I think when you think of big pharma in particular and the incentive structures that are there, the bulk of the profits still come from the Western countries. The Western countries' medical systems, or if you look at the medicines that are required there, are not really for communicable diseases. They are for non-communicable diseases. Communicable disease, less than 10% of deaths in those countries are for that. And so if you look at the broad incentive structure in the world of diseases in particular, there is actually very little incentive for big pharma companies to invest in diseases which actually don't affect them until COVID-19 came about. And that is why I think this book is very interesting at the time it's coming, because now we live in a world where COVID-19 is reframing. We just heard a few weeks back that finally a vaccine for malaria might be around, which is a huge thing in the world of global health. I think there hopefully is a shift. I don't think, to a certain extent, I would say it is a bit of wishful thinking that the big pharma companies will vanish away, or that they will have no role to play in the 21st century in developing medicines and so on. But what is proposed out here is the alternative. That is there a way to get it quicker? Is there a way to get medicines that work, which is also equally important, quicker to the market? My only concern with the framework proposed is that I think what the COVID-19 disaster has shown is two things. One, on one side, what we'd agree with Professor Kathryn is that clearly in terms of vaccine equity around the world, there seems to be a big problem. That is, we've seen just how few vaccines have been available, for example, in the vast continent of Africa. But at the same time, I do think that there are a lot of people in the world who also celebrate big pharma today for bringing the vaccine to the market in record time. I think that's also a huge a part of the world that we live in. The fact that in no pandemic in the past has a vaccine been developed within a year of the pandemic starting and giving a lifeline support to many people. And that is why if you look at companies in India, whether it's Serum Institute, whether it is all these companies which are providing these vaccines, they are literally life-saving companies which are also going to get a lot of traction. So there's this tension where you have the need to go beyond big pharmaceutical companies, which means beyond the traditional incentive structures of intellectual property rights, strong enforcement of those. And what is proposed here is a movement towards common pool resources, I like the word, sandboxes and so on. My only concern is that in this pandemic, we've seen a bit of both. I don't think it is completely a story of disaster in the world of pharma and medicine. I think a lot of people also see the positives of the record time in which the vaccines were developed, for example, with COVID-19 and so on. I'll just end by pointing out on a point which is very close to my heart, which is migration. When you talk about who innovates, it's remarkable as to how so many of the scientists throughout history, whether traditionally been based in Western Europe and USA, have been immigrants. And that's probably an interesting idea to also play with. That is, when we think of common pool resources and so on, there is what in migration literature is known as the brain drain and so on. So some of the best brains in the world of public health medicine are drawn from countries around the world who then live and work in Switzerland, in the US, and so on. It is the intellectual capital of these migrant workers, immigrants, who often support the terrific innovations that are happening from some companies. Is there a way to actually tap into these networks, what we call as diaspora networks, to feed back innovation at a cost, at a very low cost, back to the home countries? Now that is wishful thinking, but I think that's an interesting idea to play with. That is using migrant networks to kind of fuel back. We've seen that in the world where intellectual property rights are enforced. For example, think of software industry, entire Bangalore cluster emerging from returning Indian migrants from the US. Is it possible in the world of healthcare? It's an open question, but one which I would love to hear responses from Professor Kathryn. So broadly, a point on migration, a point on the uneven global demography, age distributions, the difference incentive structures that big pharma faces in different countries. And also the last point about what Professor Kathryn thinks about Gavi, which is the Global Vaccine Alliance, and their model. Where would you place that within these different categories that you've done? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chinmay. Thank you for all the points. I'm sure Professor Kathryn is taking note of it. Thank you, Professor Arima. May I request Dr. Papia to come in for a bit, and then we will open for questions.
Well, thank you. What a session. It was really interesting to see the way Professor Kathryn started to talk about the innovation, and especially how this is kind of, being trapped, what she called as a cage. And Professor Kathryn, there's one quote from your first chapter, which I found very interesting and very applicable in India. If I'm not wrong, I think it's by Robertson, where he quotes, "I want to sell drugs to healthy people. I want drugs to sell like chewing gums." And that is what is actually the case in India. And in the COVID-19 situation, we had been gulping antibiotics, just thinking that, okay, it is going to save us from the virus. And drug resistant is a major chronic health problem, public health problem in India, which we actually don't want to recognize. Anyway, moving from that, and just to harp a little bit on that, how even irrespective of the economic or the social structure in India, a lot of the household expenditure and the studies that Dr. Aditya and we have been doing in Bihar shows, especially among the poor households, around 10 to 15% of the household expenditure is spent not only on healthcare, but just buying medicines. They buy medicines equally as they would be buying groceries or necessities for their family. So that kind of, again, raises a question about the pharma companies and their kind of being involved into this marketing strategies that you talked about. Now, also coming to the marketing strategies and revenue creation by pharma companies, I would like to draw upon what Dr. Chinmay said. Demography matters. Doesn't matter that how much debate we have between the developed and the developing countries, but we should not be ashamed to recognize that the developing countries, especially like India and China, we provide such a wide market for these pharmaceutical companies, whether it is their vaccines, whether it is their life-saving drugs, or any other generic medicine. Now, just to put an example in point, WHO has declared India to be polio-free, and polio vaccine is given to all children in India. But recently, there has been a trend which says that if you have taken the polio vaccine, so you are prone to have the Alzheimer. So now you have to take the Alzheimer vaccine. So the question is that once we are coming out of one, we are going into the other. Is it just a marketing strategy? It is just a question of the patents that you had been talking about, that what if we run out of the polio vaccine, what is the next thing that we are going to catch upon, especially to encash on such a large population base. So these debates are always there, and I think it is a very pertinent issue that you have brought about. And what I most enjoyed reading in your first chapter, Professor Kathryn, is about the importance of tradition medicine, and especially, in Eastern countries or Asian countries, I should say, like India and China. And the COVID situation, when we were going through the COVID pandemic, in India, we were kind of re-emphasizing on a traditional medicines, like the importance of using basil or tulsi, I know turmeric, as you mentioned, neem. All these things were already part of our culture. But I think through this globalization and innovation, politics of healthcare, we have become so much over dependent on this chemical drugs or medicines that we forgot our own, and we are so much into west toxicated that we were ready to gulp in the antibiotics and forget our own traditional medicine. And what is most interesting, and what I kind of relate to, you have written as a part of the first chapter, is that you kind of emphasize that traditional medicine focus on caring for holistic human health, which is kind of the health promotion, sustainable health. That is, not only you prevent or protect them if they fall sick, but also allow them to maintain good health throughout. And I think in the public health domain, that is the latest paradigm after the Ottawa Charter that we have of health promotion. On the other hand, as you rightly pointed out, and I totally agree, that the modern or the Western medicine, the patented one that we talk about, they actually focus on the curative aspect. That is, they want people to fall sick, and then they're going to provide a cure to it. So the question is, are we looking, when we are talking about sustainable development goals, millennium goals, we are talking about making health as a universal right, as the right to life. So which should we more focus on, just the curative approach, or we should be more focusing more on the health promotion aspect that you have so well highlighted in your book. And also, one of the things that I think is very much in tune with our project and this the whole debate of development is the concept of knowledge dissemination. Who has the knowledge, and whether it is being disseminated through proper channels and to the people who can actually utilize it. I think that is the crux of the thing, and that relates very well to all the discourses that we have been talking about. And I really enjoyed your talk, and it fits quite well within the broader framework that was put forth by Professor A.K. Sharma when he reminded us about the sociology of development and how there has been a changing trend, and we were able to situate it with the examples from your recent book that you have talked about. So I really want to thank you for that. Now, coming to Professor Arima, I also really enjoyed your comments, especially the politics of innovation. We talk about politics of healthcare, politics of innovation. For whom are we innovating, and who is innovating? And most importantly, who is actually benefiting from it? What is the societal impact? And I think from a sociological perspective, and that's why it makes this panel very holistic, like Professor Kathryn talks from a political scientist perspective, you bring in a sociological perspective. So that kind of provides us to understand the single phenomena from different lenses. And also, your concept about the do's and don'ts of innovation. What are the things that we have to look into, and what are the things that we have to be careful about? And also the global public good, like health, health and healthcare. Is it a global public good? What are we talking about? And of course, equity to essential medicine was also something that you pointed out. It's a very kind of appreciable. And when you talk about the linkages, between community, academics, and market, especially into the healthcare system, and that's where I think Dr. Chinmay's work fits in quite well when he brings about the various networks, including the network of diaspora, the migration network, which is of course his area of interest. And he also talks about the vaccine question. Vaccine is a big thing. So vaccine is of course good, but are we just going to give vaccines to make profit, or are we also going to see the actual health impacts of vaccine? So the vaccine equity that Dr. Chinmay talks about, and what I most appreciate about your comments, Dr. Chinmay, is also the positives of the pandemic. Even I try to see that what are the positivities that we have. Of course, there are so many negative things that the pandemic has shown us. But I think the one positive thing that the pandemic has brought stark on our face is that we have started to respect health as an asset. Otherwise, we used to take it for granted. We now realize that all of us are responsible for our health, and we just cannot ask others to take the onus. All of us have to learn to take the onus, and I think that kind of brings a very holistic perspective to the development debates and putting health at the center of it. So that was my perspective, and I really enjoyed all of your comments. Thank you so much.
Before I ask Professor Kathryn to come in, Professor Sarma, do you want to say something? I liked your comment that you put in the chat box about relating to Gandhi. So please comment for a little bit.
Thank you, Professor Aditya-Raj. You had mentioned about Gandhi, and ideologically, I am also a follower of Gandhi and Hinsoraj. My worry is that as far as the analysis of how the social institutions of health were broken down in COVID situation and the crisis that is created, that analysis part is okay. But Gandhi at least was clear that Gandhi was one of the first persons to provide a critique of Western civilization and of medicine, of knowledge. But the utopia that he presented, and he himself said that he's not fighting for that utopia. He's only trying to accept those ideas in his own life. Perhaps he was doubtful about whether that utopia can ever be practiced in society. So when we talk of common pool of knowledge, entrepreneurship, etc., gender equity, biodiversity, indigenous knowledge and everything, some of the ironies you have also mentioned in your book, then is it possible to have them only in the field of health without having an economy, society, polity based on Sarvodaya and Samaj, development of all and self-reliance? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. May I request Professor Kathryn to come with a, with a little bit of discussion, and then we'll take questions. There's a question by my senior colleague Ajelu Nyumai, and we'll take that. But first, Kathryn, over to you.
Well, I've got 5 pages of notes here, so so many very insightful and fascinating comments from Professors Aditya, Papia, Arima, Chinmay, and A.K. Sharma. So I really appreciate it. Starting, I won't be able to answer all of the very important and timely questions because, again, I want to leave time for the audience to ask their questions. And I've seen some of them in the chat, and I'm trying to, I'm focusing on the people who are speaking, so I'm missing what's in the chat so far, but I will circle back to the chat as soon as I can. Going back to one of the first comments, I believe it was from Professor Arima, referring back to the HIV/AIDS crisis. Actually, I had that in the lecture, but I didn't want to talk too at length about specific cases. But as you know, Pfizer led a 38-company suit against Nelson Mandela when he was president of South Africa and tried to use the mechanism that was allowed under TRIPS to have access to HIV antiretrovirals. And I write about this actually in chapter 2. And what happened is for the first time, there was a societal response saying that this was a line too far, and pharma companies violated moral economy, norms of moral economy, by trying to sue, Nelson Mandela. I mean, that is how amoral these pharmaceutical companies are. Another interesting thing about, for example, right now, from the 31st of this month to the 12th of November in Glasgow, Scotland, we have the COP26, which is the United Nations Conference of the Parties, of which under the protocol that was signed in Nagoya in Japan, there are a number of mechanisms for the protection and conservation of natural medicine, plant, marine, and other biodiversity. But the United Nations has no sanction, unlike the World Trade Organization, that can prevent access to global markets if countries don't behave. The United Nations has no such power or mechanism to ensure compliance to any of the things that they agree upon. I hope that they agree upon more important things in regards to protection and conservation of traditional knowledge and plant and medicinal biodiversity, but there will be no actual sanction if countries continue to shirk. And that's one of the things that the global pharmaceutical industry has really benefited from. And this is something else that I talk about in greater depth within the country case study chapters, and that is global pharmaceutical companies are still producing these synthetic chemical drugs, but they're still going into these areas in the developing South to harvest biomass, because they're trying to mimic the chemical compounds within natural occurring materials, because they're running out of the synthetic material innovative potential. And then we don't know there's a lot higher toxicity with synthetic chemicals. And so pharmaceutical companies are still going into these places to try to harvest this biomass. They're just not producing drugs that are natural medicine based, because they can't patent those, because it's patenting life, although not for lack of trying. I really would love to hear more about the cases in Kerala. One of the places that I've never been in India, and I'd love to go. So if anybody wants to give me an excuse to go do field work there, I'm happy to take it. And I believe this came from Dr. Sharma, the idea that the book is aspirational, but perhaps a bit naive. And I think that's echoed in the comments from Dr. Chinmay. And that is, it's really curious, because most national governments that provide funding for science and technology development have in their funding contractual agreements with universities something called march-in rights. And those can be employed in times of crisis, but also if this science or technology discovery, although it is patented, hasn't been used. But governments don't use these march-in rights. And it's a sort of a curious thing, and I haven't researched it. I sort of encountered it anecdotally, trying to keep up with actually my book was set to go to print, and I had to keep adding things to it because things were changing quite rapidly, including the Gavi. And so I was able to include some things about the Gavi initiatives in the book, but the book had to go to press, so was not able to include all of it. Going back to, again, what Dr. Arima said about this comprehensive notion of not separating health and siloing it out from other kinds of innovations. And if we think about the inclusive nature of what human health should look like, if we had a better innovation ecosystem at the local level to protect local communities. So one of the problems, particularly in the global South, is that young people, and this is something that I write about in one of the organizations that I studied in Pune, and that is young people don't know enough about, for example, the importance of Deorahati, the sacred groves, which are also very common in China, Japan, and the Southeast Asia, these sacred spaces that have these very diverse local ecosystems of biodiversity, particularly plant matter. So young people get paid by somebody who's acting as a representative of a pharmaceutical company to go in there and just pick plants. And a young person doesn't know how to pick a plant without destroying that plant so that it doesn't grow anymore. And so because this transmission of knowledge, I think this goes back to what Dr. Papia was saying, is, this transmission of knowledge over the generations is dying off because young people haven't been taught or don't want to learn. And this, obviously this happens, Japan, the United States, I mean, all over the world, but in particular these countries that are mega biodiverse like China and India, young people have been exploited by these global pharmaceutical companies. And then again, something that Dr. Papia said made me think that really interesting that there are all of these natural medicine cures. And in fact, in my India chapter, I also include a discussion of the case of Patanjali Babarandav, which I find really fascinating, particularly the politics of so-called traditional medicine markets in India, and how Babarandav has been able to use his social networks with Modi in order to promote his now multi-billion-dollar business. But I do begin the China chapter by talking about how in the midst of the pandemic, so here in the United States, Chinese national students were stuck here. They couldn't go home. China had closed all its borders. They were not flying any flights from the United States as a way to mitigate the return of these variants that were coming back to China. And so, thousands of students were stuck here in the United States. And what the consulates did is they sent these care packages, and I start the China chapter with that example. They sent these care packages, and included in the care packages were 4 boxes of traditional Chinese medicine. And that traditional Chinese medicine was the very medicine that I mentioned that was used in Guangzhou during SARS-1 in 2002, and had been developed subsequently by several Chinese pharmaceutical firms, had been identified as a important national asset strategically by the Chinese government, and therefore was ready to be produced en masse when this second SARS hit. And so I actually have a box, a big box myself that I gave to my children, but I had to buy it from Canada. I couldn't get it in the United States. Chinese national students were able to receive it because they received it direct from the consulate, and so they were, not subject to customs rules. But just as an example of how important traditional medicine has been in this current pandemic, is why I wanted to mention it. Another thing that I really love to explore, and if anybody on this call has any ideas, is when I tried to interview people who worked for pharmaceutical companies, they were very afraid to talk about anything, very afraid. And as a researcher, I have to wonder, what is the sanction that they would suffer if they were to share what's really going on inside these pharmaceutical companies? Because it's a very powerful, you could feel it's palpable in terms of their fear of being found out that they're talking to a researcher. So the power structure of global pharma not only is that in which it's articulated up to multilateral organizations through their lobbying efforts, but also internally within their companies in terms of controlling the behavior of their people. I always love to hear about Gandhi. As you all know, he spent some time in Pune, and I learned a lot about that period in his life when he was under house arrest. And I find it fascinating, so I just like to shut up now and hear more about that before you run out of time.
No, it's good. Thank you so much. We have few questions, as you might have seen. We will take 3-4 of them that are listed by Professor Ajaylu, SS Dwivedi, my student UV, and then Anand. We'll first start by Professor Ajaylu, and as he gets ready, I'll just say that one of the things that I like about Gandhi is that he thought that knowledge is all about public. So all knowledge is people's knowledge, which is why I thought if he was here today, he would be criticizing patenting and everything. Professor Ajaylu, I won't take your time. You can come in.
Thank you, Aditya, and I really enjoy the comments besides Kathryn's lecture, and learn a lot from the comments from Chinmay and also from Arima Mishra. Kathryn, my question is, I'm interested to know your opinion about this wonder drug, which is known as the Monapinavir tablet, and came to also learn that this will be launched soon within the next 5 months and may cure the COVID patients within 5 days. So would you throw light on that if you have any knowledge of it?
Kathryn, can we take a couple of more questions? Yeah. UV, can you come in next?
Sure, sir. Can you please confirm if I'm audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. A very good morning, ma'am, and it was really knowledgeable for me. I'm a BTech student here at IIT Patna, so my questions are a little bit more towards the technical side. It's more of a dilemma that I faced while listening to you. So, we as engineers are supposed to be the ones who would be creating the solutions for tomorrow, right? So. There's a question of where do you draw the line between charity and your self-growth, your self-prosperity? I mean, even with pharma giants taking up all the kind of measures to steal the kind of knowledge that they have, making profits is one of the goals that are listed in their priority list. So, I mean, let's just take a hypothetical situation that there is a kind of surgery that only one person in the world can perform. So should they perform it for the minimum cost, making sure that the society gets benefit out of it, or should they try to make money out of it, because that is a very viable option for them? So where do we exactly draw the line between these two cases?
Thanks, UV. Dwivediji, can you come in next?
Yeah, sure. Am I visible and audible?
Yeah.
So hi, ma'am. Good morning. And I have many questions, but I'll ask only one. So how do you think that we can break down the whole global idea of taking health as a deficiency or disease, and not taking growth as an aspect as well? And how can we make people learn that psychological, physical, and social growth is also a part of health as well? And also about how can we decolonize the major big players in the medical science field, and how can we extract the present medical knowledge in the culturally rich yet financially limited tribes all over the world? How can we do that without taking the biopiracy aspect of it as well? So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anand, please be brief.
Yes, I'll be very brief. Thank you, Professor Kathryn. Thank you very much. My question is about regarding jumping and biowar, jumping versus biowar, which was totally in social media, because some people believe it's jumping that has taken place, and some people have propagated about biowar when it comes to the context of COVID. And snake bites in India, we need antidotes, and lakhs of people are dying due to snake bites in India. And the rabies is more cruel than COVID while dying. I have seen the people. And the research molecules that we invest in that are invested by pharmaceutical industries, it takes billions of rupees. And where will they get back their money from if they go for egalitarianism or equality or something like that? And then, is there any scientific validity for natural medicines and herbal medicines? Though I come from South, we use natural medicines. Is there any scientific validity in your research experience? Please enlighten. Thank you, Aditya, and thank you, madam.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Anybody else wants to comment? Any of the discussions? Asfaq, please be brief, but come in. Asfaq.
Thank you, sir. So my question is that when we talk about inclusivity of knowledge, protection of knowledge, uh, why are today's discussion has been majorly limited to patents and corporates, MNCs or pharma companies, but we can see that this phenomenon is very prevalent in research circles as well. We know that Sci-Hub, LibGen, and other shadow libraries have been continuously they face legal lawsuits. So in such a situation, how far have academia and how far have academic institutions worked to make such to make knowledge completely inclusive in nature?
Thank you, Asfaq. So, Kathryn, you had this 5 questions. Over to you now.
Okay, and my husband is talking loudly in the next room, so let's see how this goes. So many questions. How long do we have?
You can take your time.
Okay. I do need to leave for campus in a half hour to go teach my class, but I have a little bit of time now. So many questions. The first question from Dr. Ajielu Niomai. I'm so sorry. I'm not very good at pronouncing these names. So I'm a political scientist, political economist. I'm not a epidemiologist or something, although my brother is. I could ask him about the efficacy and safety of this new tablet. The issue with this coronavirus is the hyper-inflammatory response at the cellular level. And so if this drug is going to be efficacious, it's going to have to somehow disrupt that cellular level inflammation. So it's a hyperinflammation response on the body's part that actually is causing the organ damage that's causing the deaths. So it's either targeting that or it's targeting that particular area of the lung that is most effective at the early stages. So these different drugs that are being used as interventions are only efficacious at certain stages of the disease. So at the early stages, there are some that are effective in clearing the cells in that area, the lower lobes of the lung, whereas the ones that are more efficacious later on in the more acute stages of the disease. But again, I'm not a scientist, but any new intervention therapy that can be readily accessible by any patient around the world, I think is very promising. Because we know that these vaccines have not been accessible because they've been developed in the industrialized West, patented, and Pfizer in particular has been very aggressive in lobbying the WTO and the American government to prevent the sharing of this knowledge in the commons. Next question. The importance of, from Shekhar Dwivedi. I think I skipped one from Yuvi. Whether or not we should. This question, actually, I know a PhD student at Columbia University who is researching this concept of authority versus anarchy in healthcare, and how it is that doctors depend on their on the affirmation of their authority, and that authority in the United States healthcare system is gained through demonstrating that you can get your patients to pay for your services. So, for example, family healthcare providers in the United States get paid very low money. They're generalists, and they're the ones who actually care for families as a whole and whole health. But the specialized care in the United States, the surgeons that you give the example, cardiothoracic surgeons, for example, neurosurgeons are able to command very, very high prices for their skills. And again, it's not just the profit, it's the authority and status that they gain within the discipline. And so it's wrapped up within these notions of power and hierarchy that are very difficult to dislodge. And I think that's an ongoing theme throughout our conversation today, is that these hierarchies are so entrenched into the health and healthcare system that if we try to make a revolutionary move in one place, the entire system adapts around that revolutionary move to make sure that the system remains, the hierarchies in the system remain intact. So I think it's a very, very tall hill that we have to climb in order to make this happen, which is why I think that taking a more pragmatic and meso-level approach and demonstrating the significance of these more collaborative and inclusive partnerships, it's not revolution, and it is incremental, but if enough of these initiatives stay in the long term and have actually cure disease and help roll out curative medicines, as in the case of this malaria vaccine, I think that that will help to sort of shift the way in which the discourse has been captured within the WTO in particular. How do we decolonize the medical science field? You know, I mean, I'd love to know how. If you have a suggestion, I'd love to hear it. I'm not sure about the question about snake bites, so I'm going to skip that one. And scientific validity. This is actually something that China is doing very effectively. They are doing these large-scale clinical trials of traditional medicines in order to demonstrate safety and efficacy. And this is something that you don't see in markets like Japan or the United States. And the reason why China is able to do it is because they have an authoritarian system. And if the CCP decides to do something, they can coax or otherwise incentivize private sector actors to respond accordingly. Whereas you have a problem in Japan and the United States where the pharmaceutical companies don't. So where does the university get the money to be able to fund research about traditional medicines? They don't get it from the pharmaceutical companies. They're going to get it from the federal or national governments, and federal and national governments are not familiar with traditional medicines, and so it's very difficult to get those. And I've talked to researchers who have been trying to do research in traditional medicines, and it's really, really hard to get NIH and NSF funding here in the United States because the panelists are all from pharmaceutical companies, and they don't understand that. They don't understand it, and they don't think it's going to work, and they worry about the biological materials. How do you maintain standards of quality in the biological materials, because you're not actually standardizing them in any way that like you can with synthetic drugs. And so it's a very difficult process in order to test the scientific validity of these drugs. However, China is doing that right now. And I think I'll stop there and open it up to more conversation.
Thank you very much. We know that it's early morning for you. You'll have to go and teach a class. We thank everybody. If there is any question, we'll take maybe one or two more before I give it to Dr. Papia for a formal vote of thanks. I personally enjoyed the conversation. Maybe this is beginning of many research ideas, collaborations, books, articles, journals. If there is no other question, then may I request Dr. Papia to kindly do a formal vote of thanks? Thank you, Dr. Papia.
Okay, thank you, everybody. First, I would like to thank ICSSR-IMPRESS for their funding, which allowed us to conduct this development debate lecture series. We'd like to express our sincere gratitude to Professor A.K. Sharma from IIT Kanpur. He has always been supportive, and sir never says no. And thank you so much, sir, for sharing your time and knowledge with us once again. Professor Kathryn, thank you for taking out the time and adjusting to the time difference despite your busy schedule, and you could enlighten us with your new book, which I'm sure we have just read the preface and we want to read more after listening to you. So thanks a lot. Professor Arima, I really want to thank you for accepting our invitation on such a short notice, and your insightful comments have really made us rethink about some of the issues that we face on our day-to-day life. Dr. Chinmay, again, I want to thank you for bringing out some of the very critical issues at the time of pandemic, like migration and diaspora, and of course also talking about the silver lining that the pandemic has given us. So we really enjoyed listening to you. I'd also like to thank our organizing team, including our technical team and the R&D staff at IIT Patna. And last but not the least, the person I cannot thank enough is Dr. Aditya-Raj, my spouse and faculty colleague in IIT Patna, because without him, this would not be as smooth as it is. And of course, I should not forget to thank all our participants, who had been very consistent throughout, irrespective of us juggling with the time, sometimes at 7 o'clock, sometimes at 7:30, and they have been very patiently joining us throughout. This has been the 4th lecture, and they have been so consistent, and we really appreciate your participation, because otherwise, without this, the discussion doesn't become lively. And so please stay tuned for our next lecture series, which is scheduled on 23rd. And there we will have Professor Sunil Ray to give the keynote speech, and Professor P.P. Ghosh, who is the director of ADRI, will be giving the inaugural. And we also have discussants from Bangladesh, Dr. Firdausi, and from Nairobi, Dr. Andrew. So till then, stay safe, and thank you everybody for joining us today evening and during the daytime for Kathryn. Thank you.
Thank you, Arima ji.